Good morning, everyone. We'll start the meeting. I'm assuming we'll have more people come in. Welcome to the First Nations information session, Putting Resiliency into Disaster Reduction. I'm zooming from the Preok-on-Keating Crossroad in beautiful Wasanich Nation territory. Happy to be here again. And I'm in the meeting room with Amanda, so we'll be co-sharing the screen here. The session is being recorded and we'll provide the link to the recording plus any presentation materials to people as well. I'll go around the screen and I'll ask people to introduce yourself, consider sharing your position within the community, any expectations you have of the meeting, or any question that you have about disaster risk reduction and resiliency. With that, I will start with Allison Post, and thank you, Allison.
Thank you so much, Casey, and very happy to be here. My name is Allison Post. I am assistant negotiator here at EMCR, and very happy to be here on the territories of the Wasanich peoples, and happy to live, work, and play on the lands of the Lekwungen speaking peoples, in particular the lands of the Esquimalt First Nation. Thank you again for the invitation.
Thank you, and thanks for being a good sport about the presenting joke.
Of course, of course.
Allison Lohman, Vanessa.
Okay, my camera's not working, sorry. Allison Lohman, I am with Finesse. I am with the Preparedness Department, so supporting emergency management plans, all the various types of plans, evacuations, and all of that sort of stuff, and then anything else to do with preparedness. I have a background in search and rescue, ESS, and as an EPC. And what I'm trying to get from these sessions is just learning more and how I can adapt my support to helping communities.
Thank you, Allison. And I'm going to put a plug into the participants that if there's any communities that have been doing work in search and rescue and they're interested in collaborating with us on a search and rescue workshop, Allison and I would just love to work with community. If there are, maybe put something in the chat. Bruce McDonald, good to see you again.
Good morning, Casey, and everybody online. Bruce McDonald from Latako Dene, land manager. And that's a really good plug, Casey. You would be definitely interested in anything to do with search and rescue here.
Awesome. Allison and I will follow up with you. And Allison's kind of the expert compared to me. She knows a lot about this stuff.
Perfect. Thank you.
Caitlin from Seychat. Good to see you again, Caitlin.
Hey, Casey. Yeah, thanks. Caitlin from Seychat First Nation, Emergency Program Coordinator. I'm just sitting in to learn more and meet people best I can, whether or not it's face-to-face, that's fine. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much. Shane Wardrobe.
Good morning, Casey. Good to see you guys. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Michelle Jacobs, Finesse.
Good morning, Michelle Jacobs. I work for the decision support team as a technical trainer, and I'm here to learn as always. Thank you.
Thank you. Debbie Combs.
Good morning. My name is Debbie Combs. I'm from Squaw First Nation in Chilliwack, BC. And I'm the former EPC for EPS. And I am currently helping Breezy on Squaw First Nation whenever she needs help for her position. And I'm just always willing to learn something new.
Awesome to see you. Chris Marsh.
Yeah, good morning, Casey. Nice to see everyone. Thanks for the invite. I'm an emergency management advisor for the Tonaka Nation Council, calling in this morning from the territories of the Tonaka, Syilx, and Sinixt nations. And no expectations today, just always looking to learn more about disaster risk reduction. So thanks.
Thank you. Tina Wesley, Sanemo.
Good morning, everyone. As always, it's good to come to the table and to share with everyone and spend some time together and be able to support one another in whatever it may be at task today. I am the Marine Emergency Response Manager, and I'm the Emergency Manager for Sternaimo First Nations, which is the territory that I work in. And but I am, as I've mentioned before, and probably people get tired of hearing me, is I'm actually Heinz 57 because of my grandparents, where they came from two separate reserves on one side of my family, and I got two grandparents that come from separate reserves. So I'm a Heinz 57 and I'm related to everybody. So yeah, so I'm here in Sternaimo working, and I'm emergency manager for land and water.
Amazing as we talk with one another and we see the connections between us. That's always a cool thing.
Yeah.
Wiley Borg, Seabird Island.
Yeah, I'm Wiley Borg. I am the executive assistant in infrastructure here at Seabird Island, and I help out with the emergency management team that we have slowly building. I'm here to basically learn and take some notes and see what we can accomplish.
Thank you. Chris Jankowski.
Good morning, Casey. Good morning, everyone. Chris Jankowski calling in from the traditional lands of the Lekwungen speaking people. Coming today from home, which is the traditional and unceded lands of the Chaniw First Nations. Glad to be here today. Unfortunately, I have to leave at around 11 o'clock, just for your knowledge there, Casey. I'm currently the Director of Health Emergency Management for the Vancouver Island region of the First Nations Health Authority. Thanks.
Good to see you, and good to see FNHA here. Brendan Mercer.
Good morning, everyone. Brendan Mercer, the Decision Support Manager for First Nations Emergency Services Society. Happy to be joining from the traditional Kamloops territory this morning, and looking forward to showing a little bit about what we've been putting together for data collection, analysis, and some risk mapping to help communities with the whole disaster risk reduction and resiliency profile in the future. Thanks, Casey.
Thank you, Brendan. Dan Seal, Comox First Nation. If you're able to, Dean Seal.
Hey, Casey, how you doing?
Doing well, thank you.
Good, thanks. So I was listening to a fire call. Yeah, my name's Dean. I'm from Comox First Nation, Disaster Risk Reduction Coordinator. I'm just interested and curious to know how the new legislation is going to impact our emergency management plans and what sort of support FNES can offer with updating these plans.
Thank you, Dean. David Carson.
Good morning, everyone. I'm in the traditional territories, the territories of the WSÁNEĆ people. On behalf of the few communities that I'm listening for today, I want to thank everyone for your time and your sharing, and I look forward to time together here this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Lisa Slager.
Good morning, everyone. Yeah, my name is Lisa, and I am calling from the lands of the Lekwungen speaking people this morning, so represented by the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nations. I'm a senior policy analyst with emergency management and climate readiness, so supporting Amanda Broad and our team on some of the projects relating to risk and resilience assessment. And so we'll be sharing a bit more about that today. So excited to meet everyone and talk more about it.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you for all the help in putting this together. Mariah Mund.
Good morning, everybody. Sorry, I'm moving my screen so that I'm looking at you. My name is Mariah Mund. I work for the Emergency Planning Secretariat in our Landscape Resilience Department. So this is a really relevant session for me because that's one of my major goals, is to help understand disaster risk in the Lower Fraser region. And I am coming today from my home office on Coquitlam First Nations land.
Nice to have you with us. Chris Ross, good to see another FNHA person here.
There we go. My name is Chris Ross. I am calling in from the traditional territory of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. I am the training exercise specialist for the provincial HEM team, and I'm just here to learn today and see how we can additionally support our communities.
Thanks, Chris. Juan Sereno, good to see you.
Good morning. Good to see you as well, Casey. Good morning, everyone. My name is Juan Sereno. I carry the name Huicho from the Nlaka'chama territory. Currently serving Natalie within First Nation in the capacity of Emergency Operations Center Director, as well as a Special Project Manager. From my perspective, I would like to start raising the conversation regarding regional preparedness. And what I'm referring to is the fact that when there is an emergency across the province, we usually divert most resources to areas which are considered to be of high value. I serve people in the north of the province, and we made, like last year, we were surrounded by several fires, but as soon as a fire breaks out in the Kamloops area, all the resources goes there. So it concerns me. We don't have the ability to secure resources. There is a need to acquire more resources, train people to higher degrees, and better prepare ourselves. And I'm thinking that here in the north, we are located in a strategic position to help others. We have plenty of land, plenty of water still. Even though we are getting into a 10-year drought, we still have a lot of water, and we can serve as a center of help to other people in the province. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for the invitation again, Casey.
Thank you, Juan. And if you'd like, we can see about some of our staff reaching out to you and seeing if you want to have some broader discussions as you see it on this topic. I agree, that's really important.
Yeah, I'm grateful that Catherine attended an after-action review with us a couple of days ago, and Catherine and other people from FNS are very knowledgeable about what we're trying to accomplish here. Thank you.
Thank you. Good to hear. Dale Gansveld, Sumas First Nation.
Gansveld, I'm the Community Recovery Assistant for Sumas. I'm just sitting in for Jenna Nopin, who can't be here today.
Thank you very much. Trudy Peterson.
Good morning, everyone. Trudy Peterson with FNS, working in both preparedness and response for the interior region. And just looking forward to getting more information and hearing the conversation out there for the communities. Thanks.
Thank you, Trudy. Kay Peters.
Thanks, Will. This is Christopher Peters, working with FNS as the Climate Resilience Coordinator, and just glad to be here to learn.
Good to see you. James Fothergill Brown.
Hi, James Fothergill Brown here. I'm the Emergency Services Coordinator for Dididat First Nation, calling from Nitnat Village. Yeah, definitely interested in talking about resiliency. I think prioritizing resiliency over response is an effective approach. So really looking forward to this discussion. Going to have to bounce a little early though, unfortunately, but thanks for having me.
Thank you. Christine King.
Good morning. I am a new employee of the Sta'alis First Nation, and I just started yesterday. I'm the new Emergency Programs Coordinator.
Welcome. Clint Williams, Natsamat. Good to see Natsamat here.
Good morning. Good morning. I don't know if I get any better sound every time I have a call with you, Casey. My microphone's real weak. Better today?
Awesome today.
Okay, great. Clint Williams with the Natsamat Tribal Council, Emergency Preparedness Advisor, calling in from the traditional territory of the Tla'amin Nation. Looking forward to today's discussion and to bring good news and information back to our member nations.
Thank you, Clint. Tyrone McNeil. Good to see you, Tyrone.
I'm from Seaweed Island. I'm president of the Stalo Tribal Council, chair of the Emergency Planning Secretariat. Casey, I think my expectation here is how do we link this conversation into other initiatives that are taking place provincially and federally to limit engagement fatigue? For my chiefs, I'm engaged on 17 different provincial initiatives on emergency management and 16 federal initiatives on emergency management and climate resilience. And the big ticket one for me, Casey, and linking this conversation around a deepening understanding of risk and resilience is with regards to the upcoming regulation development supporting EDMA. I'm really in the dark on that regulation process right now, Casey, but we need conversations to how it is that we as First Nations educate the province and through the regulatory processes on how is risk evolving with the climate and in its various sorts, and what are the strategies that we use leveraging nature-based solutions to respond to that in the most effective way. So like others, Casey, I can't stay with you all day. Actually, a meeting got dropped last minute, so I parachuted in here, but looking forward to the engagement. Thanks.
Thank you. Those are excellent questions. I cannot agree more about so much going on and the importance of alignment and understanding kind of benefits of engagement and how things relate. Erica Williams.
Amahiluk, Erica Williams, Health Director for Gitwangak, and I'm also in our Emergency Operations Committee as a director for a number of years, and I'm also part of our volunteer fire department. Our expectations today, we do have an emergency services coordinator who's on another call right now, so I'm standing in for her and I'll catch up with her later and fill her in, but expectations, information on content and what you're presenting today, and opportunity for capacity building for our EOC and our fire department, and to build on our all hazards plan for our community. We've been affected by fire and flood in the last 2 or 3 years consistently, so it's something that we want to get a head start on for this coming year. Thank you. And I'm coming from the beautiful Gitxsan territories from Gitwangak, BC. Thank you.
Very nice to see you, and I can't recall if we met in other meetings, but I've heard your name in my discussions with Randy Lee about the good work you do. Stephen Cochrane.
Oh.
Hello.
Hi, Casey. We seem to be following the same crowd. I've been seeing you on many meetings, and nice to see all the friends from other meetings as well. I'm the community manager coming from Stanamus First Nation in Ladysmith. Nice to see some of my neighbors. I look forward to talking with Tina because in my my emergency management coordinator, Krista Perot, who many of you would know, does an exceptional job, is on leave. I'm very appreciative of knowing how much she's done because I've had to stand in and take over all of the stuff that she's been doing, and oh my goodness. Anyway, I look forward to getting more information, especially towards our hazards plan. I'd like to talk more about a regional operation like Juan was talking about, because I think we could partner with Tina. And I remember seeing Chris Jankowski's name on something about the flood that we had back in November of last year, and I saw his name on that. So it's good to see Chris on this call too. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Willie Moon.
Good morning, all. My name is Wing. I'm from the Jaladina First Nation, and I've just been recently hired as the emergency coordinator manager. So this is just my first meeting with you guys, and I'm here to learn and listen. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Good to have you. Kathy Robinson.
Hi, good morning. I'm Kathy Robinson. I am the Emergency Program Coordinator here in Hartley Bay, and I look forward to this session.
Thank you. Shane Wardrobe. Good to see you, Shane.
Yeah, I said hi this morning already.
Oh, sorry. My screen's jumping around.
Sorry. Good morning, Casey.
Yannick Lapierre. It's definitely good to see you, Yannick.
Hi, good morning. Yannick Lapierre, I work for Indigenous Service Canada. I'm the program advisor for Vancouver Island. Happy to meet everybody. I've met most of you, but for those that I have not met, happy to see you guys.
Thank you, Yannick. We're almost done. Danica Snook, Seabird.
Hello. I'm in month 2 of my position at Seabird as their emergency coordinator. Yeah, nice to meet you.
Good to see you. And Danica, I'm not sure if you're on our First Nations Circle email list. If you're not, and you want to be, just maybe pop your email in the chat and I'll make sure you're added.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Edward Robinson. And it's okay, Ed, we can circle back. Guyu Lin. Edward, if you're able to introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Edward Robinson, Gitgad First Nation. I'm the Director of Emergencies, and I work alongside with Kathy there, and look forward to listening and getting to know what's going on today.
Thank you very much. If I've missed anyone on the screen, maybe raise your hand or just jump in and introduce yourself and any questions or expectations you have of the meeting. I think we've gotten everyone. So I'll be turning it over on screen, sharing the laptop. Allison Lohman, if you could assist me on the chat, noting the people interested in search and rescue, that would be appreciated. I'll follow up with you after if you're able to help.
I definitely will.
Okay, it's my pleasure to introduce the first presenter, Disaster and Climate Risk and Resiliency Assessment. And it's 2 people, Amanda Broad and Lisa Slager. Am I pronouncing that right? Slager. And without further ado, I will share my laptop with her and she will start hers. We can click this.
And good morning, everyone. This is a wonderful treat to actually be in person with someone while I'm presenting versus being alone. Lisa Slager will be sharing screen in just a second so we can go through the presentation. But really just heartfelt gratitude, one, that I'm joining from WSÁNEĆ territories, and really very grateful to the generations that go back since time immemorial that have taken care of these lands and hold a lot of the important knowledge for disaster and climate risk management. Just had the honor of going to as an observer to the Spiritual Knowledge Keepers gathering on climate change this past weekend, and I was still reflecting and have a lot to think about from that learning experience. And then also a gratitude to Brendan and Casey, who invited us to come and present on the Disaster and Climate Risk and Resilience Assessment. It's that I'll chat with in a moment. So just checking. There we go. Thank you, Lisa.
There's a mouse if you prefer the mouse.
Thank you. And so, Lisa, I'm not sure if you can share it in a little bit more presentation mode. So just also want to acknowledge, as everybody was doing the introductions, I know many of you I've chatted with one-on-one in different forums, and some of you might have seen some of this presentation before. So if you doze off, I won't be offended, and I won't take up too much time as well, because we'll have some great conversations. I will pause a little bit, but really at any point, feel free to raise your hand or put anything in the chat. Lisa's going to be monitoring the chat, or just jump in with any questions. And so maybe with that, I'll just go to the next slide here. And so really, the intentions for today, we're not going into a deep dive in terms of the disaster and climate risk and resilience assessment, just providing a high-level overview, and I'll also try my best to answer some of the comments that have come up in that introduction. We also have at the very end just a quick little bit about what the funding opportunities to support risk assessment work are, and kind of our intent always is how can we create space to share experiences and approaches around disaster and climate risk. We really need to evolve that practice to be more than what has traditionally happened, which has been very much certainly from provincial government, has been very much more of an infrastructure focused without thinking about the long-term situation that we have to work with around climate change, but also really thinking about resilience as the starting point. Next slide. So just as a quick, where does this even come from? So when we had the new government formed under Premier Eby, there was a kind of acknowledgement that there's a lot of separate risk assessment processes going on around government. And so the Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness and Environment and Climate Change Strategies Climate Action Secretariat were directed that they had to do one integrated assessment, and that needed to build on the preliminary strategic climate risk assessment that was done in 2019. For the provincial government, there's kind of two pieces of legislation now that are also connected to this work. There's Climate Change Accountability Act. The province is required every year to report on what they've spent on climate adaptation, as well as what their planned spending is on adaptation. And then every 5 years to reassess climate risk. And then we have the new Emergency and Disaster Management Act, and we are anticipating regulations that are going to have to do with risk assessment, and I'll speak to that a little bit more. Next slide. So this is a timeline many of you might have seen in different spaces, and I won't speak to all of it, and apologies for anybody who's on a small screen and it's seeing little words. But really, really want to first acknowledge the work to understand risk has been going on since time immemorial, that I've heard so many amazing examples of working with the lands and waters and understanding what may cause risk and then taking those mitigative actions. The pieces that I want to kind of highlight in this timeline is that the last time that the province looked at a provincial level at disaster risk and all the different spaces that we needed to pay attention to was 1997. That is a very long time ago. I've looked at that at length, and I wouldn't pick up that provincial hazard risk and vulnerability assessment now. It doesn't consider any of our modern contexts whatsoever. Then, we were just talking about this briefly, the 2017 and 2018 wildfire seasons and flood seasons. They really left a mark on BC, where we really saw the brutal impacts of climate change, and that things were changing very quickly. And so we had the Chapman and Abbott review, BC Auditor General report, and that BC Auditor General report is important as it has direction in there to undertake a climate risk assessment. And so in 2019, we released the preliminary strategic climate risk assessment. I'm going to speak to that more in the next slide, as that's been a really important part of the journey that we're on now. We've also had really important other pieces that have been released, the BC First Nations Climate Change Strategy and Action Plan, which directed that any future provincial assessment needs to be co-developed with First Nations. And the other pieces that are going to be connected as we move forward that are not on this slide now are obviously that, as Casey put in the chat, that there is coming the new provincial or regional action plan on disaster risk reduction. I always get that. Provincial action plan on disaster risk reduction for First Nations that also has connections to hazards that we really want to make sure that we're integrating with as well. And acknowledging that the Assembly of First Nations just released a climate change strategy that also references provincial risk assessments. It's a common theme. Provincial risk assessments are talked about quite a bit, as well as the need to better understand risk. Next slide. And so when we released that preliminary strategic climate risk assessment, be super honest, and we will put the link in the chat. That risk assessment was really meant as an internal government exercise where we were trying to convince folks that they should care about climate change and bring that into policies and programs. But it has a lot of, there's a lot of mistakes and harms done with that provincial assessment in that there was no broader engagement. It was just internal voices speaking. So we really don't address anything to do with equity. It doesn't consider Indigenous knowledge systems and the importance of upholding those. It doesn't consider a lot of the important drivers of risk, especially for First Nation communities. And it doesn't take it, and it really doesn't get at the impacts in a truly holistic way. It's quite limited. And so that was released in 2019, and I've been on that journey with that assessment for a very long time now, where that same summer that it was released, we started conversations with First Nations. We did regional sessions around the province, and then have continued asking along the way. There's another kind of in-person session that was done in 2020, just before everything shut down, where we really asked, what is missing in the current process that risk assessments are following, that the province directs, and what would be different in a provincial assessment? And while we've been having this conversation in 2019, I don't think we fully understand yet, but we're hoping that we're making progress in this space. So first of all, we heard loud and clear, start the process first with First Nations and Treaty Nations. And so we started that earlier in this process in terms of even like, what would a framework look like? How could this process work? I think it will be really important. We're going to be doing provincial assessments and then moving to regional assessments, and we need to start that process first as well with First Nations and Treaty Nations. We're going to hear a lot about including local and Indigenous knowledges, and now with the new legislation, there is a requirement that we're anticipating for regulated entities that they will be required to, where permission is given, include local Indigenous knowledges. So this process, we're wanting to make sure that the guidance for that really comes from this process as well. And taking a strength-based approach, we're constantly looking at deficits versus actually starting from a place of resilience. Where are our strengths? Where should we continue that? And where do we need to really uplift the things like those spaces that are working and the natural systems that are working? As well, that, when we do an infrastructure risk assessment, it's pretty cold, analytical, and it doesn't often surface the values and interconnections. And we're trying to figure out how to do that, as well as embedding that Indigenous gender-based analysis lens in this whole process. Next slide. So these are just some of the key questions that we sit with every day in this project. And I think the main one that the main two I'll bring attention to here is really that what are the priority actions? We don't want to do a risk assessment that doesn't lead to priority actions. For the provincial, that's going to be harder as it's more of a kind of an overview. And thank you, Tribal Chief McNeil. I'm just seeing, I meant to update this slide, but thank you. That we don't want to do all of this work and then not have it lead directly to actions. So that's been part of what we've built into everything that we're doing, is how does the understanding that we're building right now lead to the actions that need to be taken. So there's really important drivers of risk that need to be embedded in this, as well as where there's really good demonstrations that we need to amplify, and so through policies or programs or investments in the future. Next slide. And so I won't spend a lot of time here, but also realize I failed to acknowledge Sinala Planning, who was with us in the first stage of work and is now going to be with us for the next 3 years in this next stage of work. And just the beautiful job that they did in developing kind of our framing for how we're doing this work, but as well as the graphics, because this is heavy content and beauty is really important as we're doing this. So as we're working on this provincial assessment, we're really wanting to make sure that this is just kind of planting the seeds, and that we're bringing in different elements along the way, and that and as we move into the next slide, that we're doing that nourishment collaboration. We're making sure also that it's not just all of these conversations, but that we're looking at everything we've heard before. Lisa probably will know, but we have, I think it's over 60. It might be, I think the last term I heard was 64. We've been looking at everything we've heard from different engagement processes, as well as after action reviews, try to bring that into the narrative for this risk and resilience assessment. We're also looking at best practices. We're wanting to make sure that this growth continues to have, creates additional data information that others can use, that when we do something at the provincial level, that all that data and information and geospatial analysis can be used by communities, and that then there's these branches of all the different kind of hazards that we'll be able to assess as we move forward. Different products that we can use in different places. I'm quite passionate about the space of education and would really like to see something from this provincial assessment that can be brought into classrooms, as well as that there's future growth, that we see additional action by others in terms of community level assessments and regional level assessments that all build from here. Next slide. And so as I've kind of alluded to, we'll do the provincial. We have kind of a timeline that we have to be done for the summer of 2024, but then we'll roll in straight into regional assessments for 2026. And so we don't know yet what that regional assessment will look like, other than that it will be based on water basins and First Nation language family groups. And so we're very much in the learning process right now, but those regional assessments are kind of sitting in the back of our mind as we're doing this provincial work. Next slide. And so this slide, the big thing that I'll highlight again is just that the geospatial analysis is a big piece of this work, as we've heard a lot from communities about just how hard it is to find the different information, and then also to identify the gaps where we need to do more mapping and where we need more data availability on different populations or different infrastructure. Next slide. Incorporating climate change, we're also trying new ideas around that space as well. And so we know that it's not enough to just look at the 2050s and what potential climate change we'll see then, but we need to go further and also understand where the tipping points are. If we hit this amount of warming, what does that mean in terms of how the land and the waters will all change at that point in time? So that's the other thing that we're looking at right now, and also trying to make sure that there's better guidance out there about how you can use climate science and projected climate change in risk assessments, as we've heard that a lot from communities, so that's something that they're looking for more information. And so we're working with both Environment and Climate Change Canada's Canadian Climate Services, as well as the Pacific Climate Impacts Consortium. And next slide. Thanks. And then all of these outputs, we're working closely with Brendan's team around that Lightship platform, but also on the province's Climate Ready BC site. So as we move forward, we're wanting to make sure there's connections in between these two. And the big thing is that you'll hear a lot about is that we're really trying to make this of interest to everybody. So always open to ideas. We're looking to create story maps and also have case studies as well as to find spaces where we can have things like art and kind of reminders to take care of oneself. We've heard a lot of really important feedbacks in terms of that space. Next slide. Thanks. So to date, in terms of this new mandate around the provincial assessment and then moving to the regional, the reason many of you heard from me is because we've done these 6 virtual workshops to try to kind of pick apart this a little bit. A lot of what came up in those assessments is that we really need dedicated time together in kind of more technical spaces. We also had great survey results, and anybody here who wrote a lot, thank you. There was so much richness there. We had some one-to-one meetings as well, and a lot of that has been around what are the priority hazards. And so we've landed, maybe on the next slide, landed for the provincial assessment that it was most important to look at coastal and riverine flooding, water scarcity, extreme heat, fire, earthquake, and then a cascading and compounding event. At this point in time, we're kind of setting up the structures for all those hazards, and I'm just incredibly grateful for all of the different consultant teams who have been working with communities on these spaces that have been stepping up and sharing. We also heard a lot about this technical advisory, and so we have a rough idea, but I think that's going to be shaped a lot more, and I'll show that on the next slide. And then heard a lot about how the provincial assessment, to be honest, doesn't have a lot of value for communities, but what is of value is this shared learning about what we're learning as we go along this process, and then having a space for nations to share with one another. So really grateful for the work that Finesse is doing in this space, and wanting to make sure that we set that up also in our processes. Next slide. So again, apologies if this is a little small, but what we're looking to do and what everybody should be receiving, all communities should be receiving invitations for shortly, is that we heard about lots of different interest levels in terms of being involved. And so are trying to create a structure that's going to do that. So at that kind of hold the pen level is that First Nations Committee on Disaster and Climate Risk. And I'm just throwing out that name right now, but really want that committee to own that process and name themselves and create that. We've also heard so much about that engagement fatigue and not wanting to have different processes for different things. So I'm working to also bring to that committee a kind of a path forward that we would be able to have other related initiatives, such as the strategy, coming to that committee as well to kind of have that deep dive. So the letters will include kind of that outline of like that First Nations Committee on Disaster Climate Risk, which would be doing the kind of the final hold the pen, and also having all the products and everything going up through them for that final approval. We also heard that about that need of having a process that learns from it, but is much more about kind of that exchange of knowledge versus the hold the pen. And so that right now, the name that we're using is the Knowledge Exchange on Disaster and Climate Risk, which would connect in to that committee, but be a separate process and be much more of kind of that shared learning. To create everything in that provincial assessment, we have all of these dedicated working groups, open invitation for all nations to participate in those, but really we're really imagining that is kind of doing that first crafting, and with the First Nation organizations kind of feeding up into that, First Nations Health Authority being one that we'll be reaching out to around the health and well-being, and to try to bring together kind of the storylines around how these events interact with these spaces, and to create key messages. But then we would kind of filter back up through that First Nations Committee. So it's a little bit complicated. We also recognize that this might not work for all nations, and so something else might be needed. And so there will also be in that invitation kind of just bi-monthly updates, and as well as that we will be connecting in with other engagement processes. Maybe next slide. So the other engagement sessions that we'll be connecting in with, we're not wanting to reproduce anything. So we've connected in with the WISE practices on the land engagement that the Ministry of Water, Lands and Resource Stewardship is hosting, and we'll be part of those sessions and listening there, as well as on the Indigenous Climate Resilience Forum that the Climate Action Secretariat is hosting. So maybe just to link back to what I heard at the very beginning, as we're kind of wrapping up this bit on the provincial risk and resilience assessment, is that we really want to make sure that, one, those regional assessments, that's going to be where it gets really exciting. Provincial assessments, high level, we're testing it out. Also in this provincial assessment and with the committee, we're hoping to dive into how do we set up good governance for the regional, but then connecting in with the regional assessments really leading to action. So what do we need for that regional preparedness? What do we need for to change our policies and programs from the provincial level? We are inviting the federal government into this process so that they can also take from it as well. In terms of the Emergency and Disaster Management Act, we're also trying to make sure that we are not having, for the first regulation we understand that's coming, will be for the provincial government, and we'll see all these different ministries all doing separate work. We're trying to bring them closer together and have it kind of as part of this process, and the regional as well as those next regulated entities. So we learn together and we're not sending everyone out to do separate processes. And maybe that I'll stop for a second because there's lots of stuff I can see in the chat, and I'll turn it over to Casey for a moment and then I can speak briefly.
Thank you. Allison Lohman, can I call upon you? You've been monitoring chat to help me out if there's any questions or comments that you want to quickly point out.
Definitely. Yeah, we have some questions Tyrone has put in. I don't know if Tyrone wants to just speak upon them because he's got some great points here, but he has a few of them. So I don't know if that's easier, or Tyrone, if you just want me to read out what you've written. Whatever works for you.
You could read them out, that's fine. Allison.
Okay, perfect. I just wanted to double check. One of your comments was moving away from using Indigenous. Only BC First Nations have title to land and resources. So when you use Indigenous, it includes others that have no title but are Indigenous. I don't know if you want to elaborate that, or Amanda, if you want to comment.
I troubleshoot McNeil if you have any additions, but I can comment that I really appreciate the correction, and that very much that's why we're being very purposeful in the First Nations Committee, and that especially moving forward, I'm also trying to self-correct around that First Nation language family groups versus Indigenous language family groups, and so we're moving that space where I think where we'll continue to see Indigenous being used in this process is definitely around what we call Indigenous Gender-Based Analysis Plus, and it's really looking at intersectionality and much more like in individuals around BC and how they hold different identities and what that means in terms of the services provided, and making sure that there's distinct spaces for First Nations, but that certainly different populations are equity denied, including all Indigenous peoples in that space.
Anything else, Allison?
Yeah, definitely the opportunity to create digital worlds for specific geographics, so that we can run different models of risks and hazards and events.
Thank you.
And then there's a lot of really good points on here. I don't know if we want to cover all of them or if we want to address them afterwards, but there's some really good points on here to definitely have some follow-up with.
Perfect. And if anyone has a question, please raise your hand or jump in, and it's okay if not, because we can go on to our next presentation, and we could always double back if you think of a good question after.
I did see one comment in the chat that I might be helpful for me to jump in on, if that's okay. Listen, there was one comment about HRVA, and so definitely I will say my executive director here, Tina Neal, who some of you may know, we'll frequently talk about how what we're trying to do is not our grandmother's HRVA, which maybe we could find a different term, but we're trying to do risk and resilience assessments in a very different way than what's been done before. Heard a lot of criticism of the provincial kind of hazard, risk, and vulnerability assessment template that we have out there. I was the one who worked with, in my previous role with the NBC, to bring climate change into there, and can certainly acknowledge that the way that we did it at the time was we were really directed to only think about 5 years out. And that is just very insufficient now. So we're not yet looking at kind of that provincial template for hazard, risk, and vulnerability analysis. We're waiting till we do the provincial and regional and learn from that process, and then we'll go back in and revise that. But it is something that's sitting in the back of our minds. The way that template is laid out really needs to change, as well as I know that, and Brendan, I believe will speak to this, that Finesse is also looking at having an HRVA kind of process as well. Dean.
Yeah, that was good, because that was kind of where my question was kind of heading, because obviously the new legislation talks about risk assessments, but it doesn't specify what that risk assessment looks like. And obviously with the environment and climate being included in the new legislation than it was before under the Act, that I guess people, I know regional districts and local governments are getting concerned if they got to spend money doing these risk assessments, what are they doing it on if the HRVA isn't adequate anymore under the new legislation?
Yeah, I won't go as far as say it isn't adequate, and I'm certainly not an expert on the new legislation, but have been connecting in with them and trying to learn from what they're hearing. It would be the bare minimum as it is laid out right now. There is space that you can do the things that they're asking for, but it would be a very, very bare minimum. And I don't believe that we're looking to be prescriptive. We're looking to provide guidance about what to do, but hoping that we can then revise the template. So at least the kind of the baseline that the province is setting, it looks very different than what it did before. But I don't think we're going to be at a stage to do that quite yet. This is kind of what we're looking to do here is we're trying to bring multiple worlds together in different ways. So I see this on a regular basis, actually, the space of thinking about climate change, I refer to as climate adaptation, and bringing together traditional disaster risk management, that even within the provincial government hasn't been done before. And that's proving to be an interesting adventure on its own. And so we're not yet ready to create the guidance until we really understand how those spaces come together better. Like ultimately, I think what we'd like to look at is that we don't just think about climate change as it being the driver of an event. So like climate change drives floods, but actually how do we think about an earthquake happening in a climate change future? How do we think about an oil spill happening in a climate change future, and to try to weave it in that way. Tribal Chief, thanks Ian. Tribal Chief McNeil.
Amanda, I was just going to add that when you're talking about new ways of thinking, we need to look at severity a little differently around climate change. And I use the Barrowtown Station here in Lower Fraser Valley as an example, where right now, traditionally, going back 100 years or so, that things were fine, but given November 2021 and the likelihood of that happening on a more regular basis, the severity needs to be weighted differently in an HRVA for that area. And I would pose, and I did run this by the chief of Sumas, it's his backyard, Dalton Silver, that in my view, before we run any kind of HRVA or risk assessment methodology for that piece of the river, it should be considered with a setback dike. Right now, at the pinch point, the dike is less than 100 meters wide. But if you separate the dikes by, say, 300 meters or 400 meters, another November 2020 event could come along, and there's no harm done behind the dike. But I do say that, temper it a little bit, Amanda, that by moving the dike back, we can put some farmers at elevated risk, as long as we look after them, help them out when they do get wet, because they will get wet occasionally, and they're getting wet to save a whole lot of other people and a whole lot of other businesses too, right? So that severity needs to be factored in a little bit differently than traditionally. So from there, around my comment around the digital world, we need opportunities to run new models, not based on current infrastructure per se. It might be moving a dike back, it might be rezoning an area from development to recreational or something like that. And to that end, we really need to look to leadership from the province on stick handling local governments' ability to develop in high risk areas. And the province and the feds and insurers, everybody need to discourage that development, because over time it just costs too much. Over time it puts too many people at risk, and it affects their food supply and food security and whatnot, right? So anything we're looking at on whether it's risk, whether it's resilience, whether you're running HRVA, it can't be on the old way of doing business of what is the current landscape. It should start with what should the landscape look like to be resilient, utilizing, leveraging nature-based solutions for that long-term benefit, and then run all those models and come up with what kind of determinations you need from there. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Yes. And completely agree that, especially as the climate changes, we need to really rethink a lot of our the existing infrastructure.
If there's no final questions, we can introduce our next speaker. Brendan, would you like to introduce your presentation?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Great presentation, Amanda, and great questions. Hope to answer hopefully a few questions with my presentation around some of the things that we're doing at Finesse to help communities out with data collection, analysis, risk mapping, basically everything you need to incorporate technology into emergency management planning, produce detailed reporting, help navigate some of the barriers in emergency management funding. So I guess what I can do here is start to share my screen, and then talk a little bit more about my presentation more specifically. Are you able to see there?
Yes, we are.
Oh, I think I canceled it. Sorry, my bad. I'll pop it back up here. All right. Yeah, so to get things started, basically our idea with decision support is to help gather all the best information we can. So this image is just showing fire, floods, water, air information, geohazard risk, forestry data, trying to pull it all together to put it into a decision support tool to help communities with the 4 pillars of emergency management. So we try to pull in historical data sets from the last 100 years about weather, wind influences, things like that, look at current data, flood mitigation, satellite imagery, and then look at his future scenarios where we can too, biogeoclimatic zone shifts and things like that in the future. So part of our idea at Finesse is to pull in all the best data and information that we can possibly find and support it with our GIS tools like ArcGIS and Lightship to help communities access a vast array of information to help out with all types of emergency management and disaster risk reduction planning. So this diagram here is just showing like we're looking at NASA data, federal government data, LiDAR, ortho imagery, anything that we can get to help communities with their emergency management planning, tying it all together and then giving it to communities in a way that makes sense for use in emergency management planning, but ultimately with data, communities can use it however they want afterwards as well. So what I'll do here is quickly flip over to my Lightship screen. Sorry, the weird bar kind of blocks the screen switcher. But now that I switch over to my Lightship screen here, basically this is one of the tools that we use to display a lot of the information to communities, and one of the ways that we help to display risk. Actually, one thing that I just added in the background here based on Dean's question about risk assessments is this is just an example of what we try to help out with that data. So pulling in information for preparedness, mitigation, recovery, response, putting it together in the basically the risk management framework that's out there that the province uses. The whole risk assessment piece incorporates risk identification, analysis, and evaluation. So I'll talk about how we do some of those processes at Finesse and how we can help communities sort of navigate some of those avenues with geospatial and other pieces of information to eventually get to the risk mitigation, whether it's wildfire risk reduction or changing dikes or dams or future planning and things of that nature. So now that I go back to Lightship here, what I can do is just start turning on different sets of layers. to help get an idea about what are some of the hazards or risks out there. And then afterwards, I'll show you how to be able to collect more information and then do some analysis. But just as an example here, I'll just zoom into the Kamloops area where I live and then turn on some of the layers here as an example. What we have here is looking at different range points. So if you're interested in traveling off-road, you got cattle guards, range cabins, water development. There's everything that you need to know about range lines, like I say, cattle guards, safety features. What we have in here as well for things like evacuation planning and access and egress is adding things in like the BC Road Atlas into the database so that communities can see every different road in and around their communities. In this case, Kamloops obviously has lots of different roads and access points, but the way that it's set up in this Lightship tool is communities can click on any of the points, polygons, and then find out more information about that particular road. So in terms of accessing areas to do wildfire mitigation work or understanding where some of the access points might be or egress points in the middle of an evacuation, there's a whole series of different road data, polygons, and information that's put together so that we can have put this whole piece of the puzzle together. Right now, we're looking at the transmission lines and the range infrastructure, for example, but trying to get a good understanding of where a lot of these values are on the landscape so that we can do the proper hazard risk assessments to get an understanding what might be at risk in the future. Just as another example of a data layer in the system, it's looking at highways that don't have cell service. So again, if we're planning out evacuation routes and things like that in the future, having all these different layers at the community's disposal can help to identify a broad series of risks that might not otherwise be identified because there are so many potential risks out there when we're talking about the broader landscape of emergency management. What I'll do here quickly is just change my background map, and with this Lightship tool, we've put it together so that there's a whole series of base maps that communities can access to see all this information in real time. So what I did here is just switch to the provincial strategic threat analysis. And so to get an idea of wildfire related risks, there are these layers that are already put together by the province and regularly updated that look at things like head fire intensity and fire threat rating. So again, this is just around the Kamloops area, but these data layers are available publicly. So part of the job at Finesse is pulling in all this information so that communities can turn on a series of layers and find out the details essentially that they need to know for all types of disaster risk planning. So I'll just zoom around the area. But right now, these are historical fire perimeters. So understanding where some of the areas had burnt previously can help help inform decision-making now so that we get trees planted, grass seedlings, things like that. What I did here now is just overlay another one called burn severity. And this kind of looks at where some of the highest burn areas are around the province or highest severity burn potential. And with this layer, we're just trying to get an idea where some of the highest risk slopes might be after some of these wildfires based on that wildfire intensity. And so just adding these layers into the system can help navigate the processes and nuances of disaster risk reduction so communities can get to the funding at the end of the day to actually do the mitigations and reduce the risk. So in this case, I'm just going to change my background map again here, and I'm going to go over to my terrain and soil map as an example of integrating geohazard related information here. So all these purple lines all over the screen, these are just geological fault lines. There's quite a few, so probably best not to turn that one on if you're worried about that type of thing. But with this particular map, we can look at soil textures all across the province, soil drainage polygons, and get some pretty detailed information about what the soil types are likely to do, what textures they are, and hence understand more about erosion, compaction, and things like that in the natural environment. When we start to combine that with things like the burn severity mapping, we can cross-reference terrain stability mapping that's been done by the province previously, help intersect those polygons, and then produce new maps and geospatial value-added products for communities where they could use those new maps to help get funding to then do those more detailed analysis, follow-up studies, and then the eventual mitigations. But a lot of these just help to get that process going. Here's a different example of a burn severity map from 2023 here, but same sort of idea. Just trying to map out a lot of these values to help communities navigate the barriers in disaster risk reduction. So I'll change my background map here one more time to look at some water-related features quickly, just because everything that happens on the landscape inevitably comes back to impacting waterways, whether it's a bad wildfire or anything in between. So what I'll do here is just quickly is turn on a couple of different water points and then zoom in on the map here so we can start to see where different streams are. By adding in and intersecting all the different layers, you can see where wildfires might impact some of these areas in and around communities. There's layers that look at the aquifer vulnerability indexes for certain areas around the province. I believe it's these areas are a little bit more prevalent down the coastway here, but yeah, here we go. And so there's all these kind of layers about the aquifer vulnerability indexes for some of these coastal areas around communities. And so just putting all these layers together can help communities sort of navigate where some of these risks might come from. And like I say, then eventually get funding for some of these activities by navigating through that disaster risk framework that I showed previously there. Some of the ways that we're trying to tie in real-time information to help communities even more is just by adding different data sets into the matrix of decision support systems. So what I'm going to do here is just click on a new point that I added in, all about groundwater. So using this Lightship system, we can link into other really relevant data products that the province puts out. So communities can come here and kind of get a one-stop shopping to access all of this really valuable information that's out there that might be displayed in a better way through a better tool than our Lightship or our ArcGIS systems and platforms. So in this case, it's just getting an understanding of the level of groundwater in that well around communities there. So I just got to close that screen for a second to exit out of there.
Hey, Brendan? Yep. There's one hand raised. We take questions now or at the end?
Sure, yeah, I'm happy to answer a question right now. Go ahead,
Juan, I see your hand raised.
Sorry about that. What I'm going to say may sound like a criticism, which I believe it is. I heard about the Lightship project probably a couple of years ago, Brendan. At the time, I jumped at the opportunity of being part of a pilot project whereby a number of our community members will be fully trained on how to use the program and do all the beautiful things that you can do on the screen and show it to all of us, Brendan. That was about 2 years ago. And we were part of the first 10 communities that requested a pilot project. And I still haven't seen you. My point here is that having access to this information and having the ability to manipulate all this information and collate all this information is useless for FNS. It has a lot of power for us. So my suggestion once again is please get more support, more people trained, and start sending those people to communities where we can make use of that information and the resources.
Yeah, thank you for the totally 100% truthful criticism one. Since we've been developing the Lightship platform and building out tools, we've been trying to add staff. Thanks to some of the support from Amanda's team over at EMSTAR, we were able to actually hire trainers for the first time this year. And we're just getting some of our trainers sort of onboarded and up to speed with a lot of the different decision support tools that we've built out over the last little while. So for the first time in our decision support history here, we actually have trainers that can actually come out to communities and help with that process before just the overwhelming amount of requests when it was kind of just me in the department, and then adding a few others here over the last couple of years. But like I say, so some of the good news I was going to mention later on, along with some of the climate change coordinators as well. But yeah, so in the interim, definitely a good piece of news that now we do have trainers and are looking to still hire another trainer as well to specifically get out to communities and make this stuff a lot more available in the future. So hopefully it helps you on, and apologies. It's I've wanted to get up there, but it's, yeah, there's just haven't been able to, unfortunately. But like I say, now that we have more dedicated training staff, I think that we'll be able to help you out in a much more reasonable time frame going forward. And apologies for the delay to get to the training this point in time, but look forward to the future. I guess getting back to presentation here. This next layer is going to show is just around remote sensing and looking at seismic information. So again, just linking in valuable information to the database here so that communities can do this sort of one-stop shopping, and in this case, see live seismogram data around earthquake sensors in and around their communities. So again, try to put all this stuff together so it can be really easy to access, and then look at the risks today, as well as plan out some of the potential risks in the future. And when I say looking at some of the potential risks in the future, we have to basically start collecting the data now so that we can understand what that looks like now, and then see how those trends change over time. So some of the tools that we've been putting together are like the HR hazard risk vulnerability analysis tool. And I'll just switch my screen quickly here. This was just sort of a test one that we did to see how the tool is going to work. But basically, our preparedness teams under Wendy and Jim schedule meetings with communities, go out and go through a process of identifying the various risks and coming up with scores for the various risks. Once the data is inputted into the system, it basically produces this automatic report right away that breaks it down with all the different weightings for each of the different risk levels, likelihood, consequences, things like that. And so we put this out together over the last little while, and I'm sort of doing a few tweaks in the background right now to give it a couple of updates after I think Jim's worked with about 4 or 5 communities so far. And so just based on some of the feedback, adjusting some of the processes with it. But more than happy to start working with other communities on some of these processes as well. Similar to this, this is a demonstration FireSmart home ignition zone assessment. As you can see, the mumbo jumbo in the home address here. But basically, you're able to collect all your FireSmart home ignition zone resiliency related data and information into the apps, and then it produces this automatic PDF report afterwards. It's designed to save time, save bureaucracy, and then help get to that funding at the end of the day. And so this is just, again, an example of a demonstration FireSmart assessment, but it can take all the scores, do all the fancy math in the background, produce reports, graphs, and things like that to, again, help really quickly navigate some of the barriers and bureaucracy and emergency management. Just going back to this map quickly. Lightship, just going to switch to another remote sensing layer that we put together. And when I say remote sensing, it's just about trying to look at real-time information through a variety of sources and sensors in the province. So you've seen the groundwater sensor, the earthquake sensor. Another one that we've put together is just helping communities link into the River Forecast Center. So in a second, you could click on the different squares around the province, and they're color-coded. The darker they are, the higher the risk is, and then get an understanding of what that return interval is for that stream, as well as then, more importantly, link into the valuable information that looks at that hydrograph. So in this case, not a lot's going on, but if we're looking at it in the peak flood season, we could actually get a 5 to 7 day prediction of what that stream might look like over the coming week, and then start to help communities with planning out resources, getting tiger dams in place, getting the proper supports and backups to make sure that we prevent and mitigate some of these disasters in real time. I'm just going to change my map again here and go to a climate change related one. Thanks to Guyu's great work, he's put together this climate change map, and the version that I'll show here is a little bit different, but we do have a publicly available version where you don't need a user account to sign on, and you can kind of see some basic climate change data. But essentially it's set up so that you can click onto your reserve, your home community, and then see what that's going to look like over the next 100 years. In this case, it's extreme heat, but you could look at extreme cold, rainfall, temperature changes. And then again, there's links that are set up in the system to help communities navigate to other products that help out identifying climate change and risks over time. This is just an example of one of the sources that we draw data from, but they have a pretty good way of looking at it, especially in a time-lapse series. So if people are familiar with biogeoclimatic zones, don't worry. It's all about what species, what trees, what plants might exist in what regions around the province. So this is a map looking 1961 to 1990. And then I'm just going to switch it to 2011 to 2040, and you'll start to see some of the zones change. I'll skip 2041 to 2070, but I'll go to 71 to 2100. And then you can see a lot more, in this case, interior cedar hemlock, interior Douglas fir, and there's a lot of other different ecosystem changes. So by looking at this, we can start to get an idea of how ecosystems and some of the risks might change around communities going forward. And then to Tyrone's point, we need to be able to model some of this stuff. So taking a lot of this public data and information, we're able to actually create 3D models using ArcGIS. This is an example of a forested stand. What it looks like based on the publicly available vegetation resource inventory data. And then we can model different wildfire mitigations or different climate change scenarios or different dikes under different flooding scenarios. But with the different decision support tools that are out there now, again, that's where my team comes in, is pulling all this best data together to help communities get these value-added products to support with a range of disaster risk management planning, as well as then building up their information to manage and govern emergencies more effectively in the future. So I think probably covers everything. I think that's probably most important around some of the different data collection, analysis, reporting tools that we've put together so far. But happy to take any questions.
Brendan,
know anything else? Yep.
Thank you for that. If it's okay, maybe I'll cover some of the comments and questions in the chat.
Sure.
So there's a good link for anyone who's interested on the West Coast US model for interface, fire risk, hazard, and resiliency, especially comparing that to what's in place here. It could be a better model and very different model. A question: in EDMA's Principles of Emergency Management calls for reducing risk, how is this conversation going to inform the development of regulations to support that? And maybe I'll, Meta, do you want to take a crack at that? Or is that a question for the other department?
Certainly it's one for Policy Ledge, and Lisa's confirmed that she's been capturing all of these, and we'll connect in with them. I would say that we're constantly having touch points with the team that's doing that, so that we're sharing everything that we hear through our process, and also that we're getting a chance to hear some of the feedback on the process for the new legislation and the regulations. Honestly, I would say as well that as we keep going, that and just thinking about the First Nations Committee on Disaster and Climate Risk, my hope for it, and this is my learning from past processes when we had an advisory that really guided our work on the climate preparedness and adaptation strategy, is that they will direct us about how they want to be involved in different processes, and so there might be overlap there, but that's just a guess in terms of as we move forward.
Thank you. Moving along in the chat.
Just even with the data, like all those different modeling scenarios can help inform policy, because you model all those different scenarios and then you understand what types of dikes and dams have to be in place and some of the financial resources that have to be there in the long term. And so by modeling and getting all this information, these are just some of the ways that Finesse can help. And Christopher Peters introduced himself as a regional climate coordinator, can help navigate some of the funding barriers to get communities the funding to get all those assessments, get that data sets in place to then build it into policy and the long-term FNIP action plans and things like that going forward, comprehensive community planning.
Thank you, Brendan. Next one in the chat was not seeing the 4 priorities of the Sendai framework in the graphics, and then outlining the 4 priorities of the Sendai disaster risk reduction. Those are good points. And I don't know if you want to speak super brief about kind of the alignment with this and how that relates.
Maybe I'll turn that one to Brendan, because I think that graphic, unless I'm mistaken, was more for the kind of first slides.
Brendan, you want to take a stab at that one?
Yeah, the graphic that I put up wasn't necessarily meant to show the 4 priorities of the Sendai framework, rather just the 4 pillars of the Sendai framework. Certainly that could be another separate image in the future, because each of the 4 priorities is quite important, but part of that graph or image that I pulled up was just to show how we are looking at air, space data, geohazard information, forestry data, pulling it all together sort of through that spider web there of resiliency, bringing it all in so that we can integrate it and use it for each of the 4 pillars going forward. Certainly that strengthens and adds to some of the priorities, but I could certainly look at developing a second area image for the priorities in the future. Hopefully that answers your question there.
Thank you. The next comment, there's going to be a clash over risk governance between First Nations amongst themselves, overlaps, and First Nations with local government if this isn't set up right with provincial supports. That's definitely a very good comment. Speaks to me about the need for the regional assessments, the regional preparedness, and the collaboration that's required. Either of you two have anything to briefly add on that?
Just more that I know Lisa jotted that down, and we'll share that over with our policy and ledge folks. Yes. But I know that is coming up in a lot of the engagements around the new legislation and the regulations coming up. And same with just looking at the next comment as well, how maybe I'll preemptively say same applies to this one.
Yeah. Thank you. There was a comment about Lightship being a great tool and how do we access that data? And I put something in the chat, Brendan, that every BC First Nation can access Lightship with an account through Finesse, and that they control the information that they put in as OCAP is followed. And I put your email. Is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Perfect. Yeah, sounds like you covered the principles pretty well, but yeah, I can recap quickly. Like Casey said, Lightship is available for free to all the communities. Thanks to some of the support from Amanda's team at EMCR, we were able to just hire trainers this year for the first time, just a few months ago. I believe Michelle put her email and name in the chat there. So feel free to reach out to Michelle Jacobs, and she'll be able to help you sort of navigate some of the training pieces for Lightship. But yeah, again, it's free, available to all communities. Basically tell us who you want signed up, how many people you want trained, and we'll work to make it happen now that we're starting to have the resources to have trainers and people like that into place going forward. One thing too, I'd say too, with the one thing that Tyrone put there, adding to the data thing, if communities have all this risk management information, then they can help to set the priorities going forward. We used Lightship this summer where giving communities that real-time information allowed them to tell the regional district what to do, moving resources around in real time by just having that information. So I hope that through this process of adding better data and geospatial supports for communities, they'll be able to set those priorities and tell government what to do, especially when it comes to incorporating nature-based solutions going forward, because that's quite obviously needs to happen on a grand scale.
Maybe I'll just build on the OCAP pieces. So really grateful for Finesse having a tool that communities can choose to use and that protects their knowledge. That's been something that we've thought about a lot in terms of Climate Ready. We don't have the capabilities, and also really need, I think, a lot more learning to better understand how we can. I think there's a lot of conversations ahead about how to make sure that First Nations knowledge and science and everything is brought in, but also protected, following OCAP principles or any other kind of direction that nations provide. There is also under and we'll talk about it maybe just at the end, there is funding related to risk assessments and doing just different pieces of work. If your nation is looking for ways to protect its knowledge related to understanding risk, there are pathways that are possible through, for example, the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund Disaster Risk Reduction Climate Adaptation Stream. We saw that there's some really innovative ideas that came out of the extreme heat mapping one. And so please feel free to reach out around that.
Thank you for that. Good comment in the chat about changing the narrative on fires. Wildfire comes from wildlands, which is a colonial construct as not cultivatable. We have cultivated and stewarded those forests for millennia, call them forest fires like they used to be called. And we need a new term for brush and sage fires where there are no forests. Definitely a good comment. There's a question. I heard Finesse was hiring climate coordinators. Are you including local First Nations in that process?
Ideally, yeah, directly into the process. The idea with the climate change coordinators is Christopher Peters, who's on the call, is our first coordinator that was hired. But as we start to add a few more coordinators, they're going to be based in different regions around the province. And one of their goals is to help communities with getting funding. One key avenue to build resiliency is getting and building capacity. So part of that, those funding applications and supports that our climate coordinators can provide is in some cases even pen to paper to help get grants for the community to then build their own capacity internally. So the grant that we got to kickstart this is just that, just enough to kind of get a few coordinators and kickstart this process. But again, part of the goal is to help get you guys funding in each of your communities to then have your own coordinators for EPCs and climate change coordinators going forward. As we continue to go down the road of climate change, we hope to be able to add more resources to the pot of funding, and then in turn, like we had done with EPC coordinators earlier this year, giving communities funding for those positions, similar thing in the future. So as we start to grow and expand, we'll be looking at different opportunities. But like I say, for now, we'll have get the coordinators in place, and then they'll be able to work with communities one-on-one to find out what the needs are and then build up the funding supports and mechanisms to make those projects or dreams a reality in that sense.
Yeah, maybe I'll just add and give a little bit more context as well, Brendan, for the incredible work that Vanessa is doing in this. That when we put forward, I'll put past context. I used to be in the Climate Action Secretariat, and when we put forward the Climate Preparedness and Adaptation Strategy, we really felt it was important that there be First Nations-led climate resilience work that took place in that. And we're only able, unfortunately, to get a pilot program, and so that pilot program is being co-delivered through from funding that went to Climate Action Secretariat, to Finesse, and to the Great Bear Rainforest Coastal First Nations. So we're super excited about the pilot and all that can come from it, and also the idea that this could be expanded beyond just that. So I know that it's going to be something that Minister Heyman, who's actually representing both ministries right now, will be speaking to as well.
Thank you. Brendan, when you were doing your presentation showing the changes up to 2070 on the map with one of the layers, Vancouver Island just showed green, and I think this was when the comment in the chat was, I don't see a lot of mapping for Vancouver Island, but I'm assuming there's a lot of data available for Vancouver Island.
Yeah, there's a ton. I just kind of zoomed into Kamloops, just being that's where I live, and sort of zoomed around that area on the map. And so just naturally, I didn't work my way over to the coast. But rest assured, there's all types of information for the coast as well. Different species at risk habitats for incidents, oil types. There's NOAA BOYU data that pick up ocean temperature, weather patterns, all kinds of really valuable water chemistry data from remote locations all over the Pacific Ocean. So there is a ton of information, and just my presentation didn't quite go out that way. The thing with the Lightship tool is there's probably, like, I could talk and ramble for several hours because there's so many different things. Tyrone knows we've sat down before and had the discussions and ended up going way over time because there's just so much. There's so many different processes, so many different data sets to incorporate. So I think, if I recall, that might have been Stefan that asked. I'd be more than happy to sit down with you and show you data sets specifically in and around Vancouver Island. But off the top of my head, there's really good data around aquifer vulnerability indexes, groundwater station monitoring. There's vegetation resource inventory data around tree species, heights, biogeoclimatic zone data. So there's certainly no shortage of information, but more than happy to chat afterwards.
Thank you, Brendan. There's a question on how many communities in BC have taken on Lightship and been fully trained in the program?
I would say because of the size and scope of different processes in Lightship, that I don't even know if everybody on my team has been fully trained in all the different tools, because there's HRVA assessments, fire safety assessments, you can do fire smart assessments, water quality assessments. There's GUYU on my team's developed a whole host of different forest carbon related assessments to measure the amount of carbon in forested ecosystems, energy forms to track carbon emissions from vehicles, buildings. So there's so many different parts of emergency management that Lightship can support with, that to know every different aspect would be quite a lot. But I am in the background here just trying to pull up my user statistics right now so I can give you a more appropriate answer about how many people are using it. Yeah, so I'm just looking at it right now in the background. Yeah, we've had some months in the summertime where there's been over 700 to 800 people signing in, different people throughout the month to look at pieces of wildfire related information. On average, it's about 45 to about 60 communities, give or take, each month that are signing in to do a different related project through Lightship. And so some communities will sign in for a week to do fire smart assessments. And then once they get all that data inputted and all those reports that I showed, we'll report it out the following week. So they'll use the Lightship platform for a few weeks and then not use it for a couple of weeks, and then need to pick up that data down the road for final reporting for their project, and then use it for a few days for final reporting. And then 2 months later, they might want to do a different project and start looking at evacuation route planning. And so they'll pick up the tool again and start doing evacuation route planning with the tool. So it kind of goes in ebbs and flows, but generally speaking, about 45 to 50, sorry, I wasn't even sharing. Yeah, so there's my user statistics as an example. So yeah, plenty of engagement on it. It dates back to 2020 when it was just me on the side of my desk trying to put data layers into a system. I don't have any statistics from before that, but as you can see, quite an increase in the amount of monthly users, near 500% increase since we started kind of offering it in 2020 as a service. But back then it wasn't as productive or efficient as it is now, where you could do all these different assessments. Back then it was really just fire smart and wildfire threat assessments, but now it is expanded to so much more, and there's so much more possibility. But again, feel free to reach out to me or my training team, and we'd be happy to show you any of the different aspects of the tool for any of the types of emergency plans that you want to come up with or need to revise.
Thank you. And in the email, there's decisions support at finesse.bc.ca is the best email for training requests. I'm assuming on Lightship. There's a comment about from Tyrone about potential involvement in recruitment of one of the regional climate coordinators. If you could make a note of that, Brendan.
Yeah, Christopher Peters is actually from that area. So Christopher Peters, please, reach out to Tyrone and vice versa. I can try to connect you as well in the background afterwards. But he's being hired as the coordinator for that region, so you guys can get started on looking at funding applications to support the communities right away.
Okay. And then there's information on the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund in the chat. There's a question, how much of the disaster risk reduction climate adaptation, I'm assuming the UBCM funding is set aside for First Nations?
There's not a specific amount set aside for First Nations. It's open intake for local governments and First Nations. I will say that it's been undersubscribed, I think, for the last 2 intakes. And there's, I believe, and I think we have a slide on this, and Lisa will correct me in the chat. I think there's 3 more intakes right now that are scheduled for that.
Yeah, and just
that's where our climate coordinators can help in and support as well with those type of applications. Climate change can be fairly broad when we look at all the different hazard types.
Thank you for that. And some closing comments in the chat. Just appreciating the information as well as the sharing, especially from chiefs in the meeting and the local knowledge they have. That does the chat. Would anyone like to raise their hand or jump in with any additional questions? And it's okay if not. We can reclaim. Juan, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, I wonder if at a future opportunity we can focus our energies on discussing what may be necessary in the future. Since I started this journey with emergency management, I noticed that there is a number of different organizations who do really good work on their own, but they cannot work together. There is a lack of collaboration that we need to undo. My other observation is that we are now at a critical point that we have a new legislation, and like all pieces of legislation, is a beautiful document. It appeals to everyone. That's what the legislations do. The devils, however, are in the details, and the details are actually the regulations. So my proposition is that we need to focus on influencing the new regulations, because that's what is going to make the difference for communities. The act is beautiful. It's a piece of legislation that appeals to everyone. It's the regulations that are going to be affecting our lives, and we need to influence those. We need to influence the development of those regulations. When I look at the amount of money that we spend provincially after a disaster like a wildfire, we spend billions. 2017, over $600 million, 2018, somewhere in that neighborhood, that you multiply that by 3, which is the recovery cost, you are entering into the billions of dollars. Yet, we do not have a level of response from large organizations to attend to those emergencies. We lack the infrastructure to attend to ongoing disasters that are taking place in our environment. We lack the training. Our community members are still considered to be only good enough to go and join a cleanup crew, a mop-up crew. We have to fight tooth and nails to get an initial attack crew here in the north. And with the help of Finesse, we were able to get specialized training, and we have 4 people in an initial attack, an indigenous initial attack crew here in the north. the only one in the north, and the second one in the province, I believe. But we do need additional training. We do need a commitment to invest in preparing communities. We need to access heavy-duty equipment to be able to respond to the various emergencies that we're experiencing. My last comment is that I have seen the way in which different government agencies spend money. And they spend monies like drunken sailors when there is an emergency. But those monies are usually directed to corporations, industry, and nobody even question a bill for heavy-duty equipment. But if I send a couple $1,000 a request to support a group in my community, I get 1,000 different questions. So something needs to change in here. We need to start looking at protecting our communities on a regionalized basis, because like I said at the beginning, there is different priorities. The north is not as important as the coast, basically because there is more people living in there is higher, more expensive values in there. And when something happens, all the resources in the province goes to the areas which are deemed to be more important or more valuable. And we are left without anything. We are left just looking at the fires consuming our environment. So my suggestion is that we take the time to focus on these issues, and Casey, maybe you want to plan for a meeting to discuss specifically, number one, how we can better prepare ourselves and influence the development of regulations, which are right on top of us right now, and how communities can work with all the emergency management partners to develop the capacity to better respond to disasters in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Juan. We can follow up with you on that for sure and see what works. Brandon or Amanda, anything to comment on that, or is that good information for us to hear and listen?
I think really important as a provincial representative for me to listen, and I think the EMCR team will certainly take what you said back as well. And I know from the policy and ledge team, they're very interested in hearing from First Nations about the upcoming regulations. And I agree. The legislation is just the first piece, and then there's so much more to go.
Yeah, I think a good learning thing, and I appreciate your honesty, Juan, as always. Thanks for your great wisdom and honesty.
This has been a lot of information. I've heard some of it, and it's sinking in more for me, especially the sharing and the comments and the suggestions in the chat from community perspective, the title and rights holders. I always appreciate that. If there's no final question, I think we could regain 15 minutes of our day, and my thanks to the presenters and the helpers who helped put this on. My thanks to the people that took the time to come in and share, and also for the work that you're all doing throughout this province. My hat's off to you. Have a great day, everyone. We will share the link as well as the presentation material. It will be emailed out.